The Canadian Grand Prix was hectic for all the right reasons, and today we're going to jump into every little detail we possibly can. Welcome back to Racing Direct, guys. I am Kyle, and yes, the Canadian Grand Prix was probably one of the best races we've had in a very long time, and it's because it was so unpredictable. Changing conditions, tons of overtakes on track, some controversy brewing on and off the circuit. It really had it all. So of course, I remind you guys the magic words to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Let's jump into all the details from the Canadian Grand Prix. First and foremost, shout out to Max Verstappen and Red Bull because they pulled off a fantastic win. They conquered all of the elements and all of the changing conditions, and really you just have to tip your cap to this one. Max drove flawlessly. Yes, he might have gotten some help from the safety car on this occasion, which can't be said about some of the other drivers, but he did everything he needed to do, so shouts out to Verstappen. But behind him, there was an incredible race brewing from the first lap all the way to the final lap. Now, for starters, who had a George Russell pole position on their bingo card for this season? And on top of that, Max Verstappen setting the identical lap time. That qualifying was absolutely ballistic. Of course, the rain played a huge part in it, but yes, Mercedes did take advantage of the conditions early on. So we already knew we were in for a bit of a treat in the race, but I don't think anybody could have predicted what exactly was going to happen, and that's really what made it so damn fun. It all started off with the crazy Haas strategy of starting on the full wets that actually paid off, and at one point it did look like we were actually going to see a miraculous first podium or victory, whatever you want to call it, for maybe Nico Hülkenberg. Would have been a first podium for Kevin Magnussen, but the way they were going, and it looked like they had timed everything perfectly with the weather and the tires, it honestly looked like we were on for a Haas masterclass. But then we already saw things could change so quickly when the weather is so unpredictable. I mean, after that, we did see a masterclass from the McLarens, which that car really handled the changing conditions very well. I was honestly so blown away by how good Norris and Piastri looked in the rain, especially on those intermediates early on. It seemed like they could just go offline and do things that other cars couldn't. So that's a massive shout out to the McLaren engineers for developing that car. And obviously the upgrades that they've put on from the start of the season are working absolute wonders at every single aspect. And that is exactly what you need to actually take the fight to Red Bull. I mean, the Mercedes, who honestly thought they were going to be that far up the grid, and Ferrari were going to be that far back. It was absolutely hectic and so crazy to see. I mean, Russell and Hamilton were really giving problems to Verstappen and Red Bull, or at least giving them something to think about. They couldn't really rest and take it easy at any point during this Grand Prix. And we saw how close Norris was to actually beating Verstappen on this occasion once again. If it wasn't for the timing of that safety car with Logan Sargent's spin, we could have had a very different story today and a different race winner, but that's just the way the ball bounces. That's the way the cards were dealt, and Verstappen and Red Bull once again got it perfectly with the pit stops and a little luck with the timing as well. It was a little sad to see Norris just struggling coming out of the pit lane on that damp section, but that is racing, and honestly I think McLaren will happily take a second place for Norris because they proved once again that it was not just an outlier Miami. That car means business, it is serious, and they can seriously take the fight to Red Bull. And it finally looks like Mercedes upgrades are paying off, or maybe they just work a lot better in changing conditions or in the wet. So if they do get some more wet races in the future, we could be seeing an actual Mercedes podiums, or who knows, maybe even some wins down the road if they can keep developing that car. But obviously it was a much better race for Lewis Hamilton than he's had so far this season. Even if he did end up getting that podium that he so badly wanted, he showed a lot of signs of the old Hamilton and some real class on the track. And I think that's what Mercedes want to see going forward. We already know that he's parting ways, and sure, they're obviously giving preferential treatment to Russell because he is sticking around, but Hamilton was finally looking rejuvenated and back to his old self in that Mercedes. So hopefully for their case, it is working much better than it was earlier in the season. Further down the grid too, or just a little bit further down the grid, the RBs were also looking quite quick. Both Tsunoda and Ricciardo had some pretty solid weekends. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for Tsunoda in the end with that spin, but Ricciardo did great, and honestly, he needed a good performance after those crazy comments he faced from Jacques Villeneuve. I think that's a topic for another video because there's so much we can dive into with that one. But Ricciardo showed that yes, he still has some good performances in him, and that RB is slowly but surely getting a little further up the grid and perhaps where they wanted to be at the start of the season. Alpine also had a double points finish following that crazy and terrible incident they had in the Monaco Grand Prix, but their turmoil is still far from over. We saw some team orders go array between Ocon and Gasly later in the race. Again, that might be something that we need to dive into in a whole other video because the situation at Alpine is getting much worse very fast. Even with a double points finish, the drivers are at odds. The team principal is clearly not very happy with Esteban Ocon, and Ocon is not happy with the team orders and how he didn't get the position back from Gasly late in the race like he was supposed to do. And let's not forget, we also saw what was probably the best overtake we've had all season, the double from Alex Albon going into the final chicane. Honestly, it probably was a little bit of evasive action as well to avoid a massive crash going into that corner, but he was able to thread the needle between two cars like it was absolutely nothing, and that was probably one of the best overtakes I've seen in a long time, so special shout out to Alex Albon for that one. Of course, he didn't make it to the end of the Grand Prix thanks to a spinning Carlos Sainz, but hey, what are you going to do? At least you probably will be in contention for the overtake of the season at the end of the year, so that's something to brag about, I guess. But yes, obviously we know there's a ton of action that happened on track, a ton of action off track as well. So much to talk about this Canadian Grand Prix, but the one main thing we wanted to shout out is the fact that Formula One is fun. And the reason why it's fun is because that was so damn unpredictable. Again, that's not knocking Verstappen and Red Bull at all. Kudos to them. They've just been better than everybody else for the past few seasons. And once again, you've got to tip your cap. But I think as a neutral fan, and probably honestly perhaps as a Red Bull and Verstappen fan as well, you can all agree that competition is good. And these races like the Canadian Grand Prix are exactly what the sport needs. And it looks like with these cars and all the upgrade packages they're getting, closing the gap to Red Bull and Verstappen, it seems like we'll be getting a lot more of these in the future, which is so good to see. Now, in terms of where I feel the teams are sitting now in terms of performance, I would say Red Bull is still in first, well, at least for Max Verstappen. I don't really know what Sergio Perez is doing at the moment. A terrible weekend again after what was a atrocious weekend in Monaco. Thought it couldn't get any worse for him, but Canada was just brutal. He also got an extremely weird penalty that's going to carry over into Spain. I think it was a 3-place grid penalty. It was officially declared as returning the car back to the pit lane, or a damaged car, to avoid a safety car at the start of the race that would have hindered Max Verstappen's Grand Prix. It's a little bit strange to decipher. I think this is probably the only race series where you actually get a penalty for something like that. Every other series, you're really encouraged to get your car off the track if it's able to and get it back to the pit lane, so there's less work for the corner workers to do, less work for the marshals, and they can avoid a yellow flag and a safety car. But in this case, Formula One was not happy with Perez's decision. They thought he should have parked the car, I guess. Still a little bit strange to me, but he's going to get a 3-place grid penalty in Spain for his actions in Canada. Yes, while it's not getting any better for Perez, back to the main point, I still think Red Bull and Verstappen are the kings, and they are the team or driver combo to beat. But McLaren is right behind them. I would put them at number 2 at the moment. I don't think this weekend is going to carry over for Ferrari. I'm sure they're going to turn things back around in Spain. Whatever reasons there were, they just couldn't really match the changing conditions. They couldn't really figure it out with the strategy. I think it's best for them to just completely forget about Canada, forget it even happened, wipe it off the face of the map for them, out of your memory, and just move on to the next race. Ferrari is still right there. I don't think Ferrari fans should be worried about this. Again, just one bad weekend doesn't make or break your season. But I'd still give a slight edge to McLaren over Ferrari in this case. I think that McLaren is just a better overall package by a slim margin at the moment. Again, I think it can handle changing conditions a little better, and we also have to take into consideration the driver pairing of Norris and Piastri. I honestly think that could be the best on the grid right now. Both of them look fantastic once again in Canada. Every challenge that was thrown at them, they managed to handle it with grace. Norris made so many overtakes. Even when he fell back in the order, he got everything back again. Piastri was feisty. He was fighting with everybody. It was phenomenal to see those McLarens doing so well, and once again taking the fight to Max Verstappen. So I do give them a slight edge over Ferrari at the moment in terms of balance of performance-wise, but those are your clear top 3. Mercedes is slowly but surely closing the gap. I still think they have a ways to go to get up to Ferrari and McLaren's level, but hey, that was a very good weekend for them. I think they should take that in stride, improve off of this, help build off of it, and figure out what worked and what didn't. And I think, yes, Mercedes could make it a 4-way fight sooner rather than later. Yes, those are pretty much my initial thoughts after that Canadian Grand Prix. Definitely my favorite race of the season so far. Again, the changing conditions really played a factor in that. But it also confirmed that, yes, this is officially a 3-horse race. It's not just the Red Bull and Verstappen show anymore. McLaren and Ferrari are definitely right there and can seriously take the fight for them. Again, even though it was a bad weekend for Ferrari, Tifosi, don't sweat it. It was one bad race. I'm sure you guys are going to do great again in Spain. The fact of the matter is, Formula One is once again unpredictable, and that means it is fun. That's really all we want. But yeah, that's sort of where I stand right now in the current state of F1 after that Canadian Grand Prix. It's absolutely fantastic, and this is where I think these sort of top teams sit in the pecking order at the moment. There's definitely more I want to unpack from this weekend, including the rift between Daniel Ricciardo and Jacques Villeneuve, the crazy turmoil that's boiling over at Alpine. We definitely need to talk about that some more. But yes, once again, leave your comments down below. Tell me what you thought about this race or your favorite moments, because there were so many electrifying moments from this race, so I want to hear them from you guys. Again, remind you to hit subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss out on the rest of the news we're going to be jumping into this week following the Canadian Grand Prix with driver signings, off-track drama, all of that goodness. So once again, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Racing Direct.